very exciting for me to meet you, Mark. I mean, I have to say, I've read about Biosphere too, and I was just saying to Victor, actually, I think what you did is actually more remarkable than going to the moon. Spending 2 years in this kind of enclosed biosphere and just learning, how well to live with the entire ecosystem without which we wouldn't be here. And I found your comments about it and the general account of it really, really fascinating and very moving, actually. I mean, it must have been an experience that totally changed your life, I'm assuming.
Well, we had worked for 20 years in ecotechnics, trying to bring together these worlds of the great world of nature, which I love in your work. You point out that we've kind of lost the main question, is how do we live on planet Earth in a, and you're on that page of sustainable was revolutionary 20 years ago, even though it might have been meaningless in an evolving world. But regenerating our world. So I like to always be the optimist that anything that humans have screwed up, we can fix. And we didn't have the context that we live in a totally materially recycling and a world that's more tightly sealed than Biosphere 2 was.
Yes, yeah. But just bigger, so it's sort of more difficult to comprehend that it is limited. And of course, we've inherited ideas about our place in the world from times when people did assume it was unlimited, So there's a whole set of things. I mean, I'm very fascinated by, I think, for me, the lens of food, which is something that I've been really sort of been looking at the world through for the last 20 years or so, has really changed my perception, because it sort of shows me all the stuff that we take for granted normally, and all the assumptions that we carry with us that actually turn out to be wrong just because they came from another time and place, And I think it's sort of when you have an experiment like Biosphere 2, where you're sort of actually, to a certain extent, you're replicating the world, but you're actually demonstrating something that's fundamental and maybe it's difficult to grasp for people because, the world does seem infinite if you're just, tiny little human going about your business. But this perception that it's, learning that it's limited, but it's still unbelievably bountiful and, as you say, repairable. It's a living thing, So even though we've screwed up quite badly for the last, shall we say, 200 years, it's not beyond repair.
No, totally. I mean, there are many influences behind the creation, the concept of Biosphere 2, but very importantly was the Russians. And so there was both Vernadsky, who kind of predated Lovelock, and he invented biogeochemistry because as he studied the world, the power of life, our biosphere shaping our planet, so that, which blows away this notion that, aren't we humans lucky to live on this habitable planet? And the Russians have a really nice, it's sort of a dichotomy. Here's the biosphere in its totality, in its breadth and complexity and evolutionary track, and here's the technosphere. And these are the two elements that have to be brought together. So among other things, what I loved about Biosphere 2 is when you make a small human-designed world, first off, you're not the master of it, because if the microbes in the soils and the waters are not performing, doing their heroic action to keep the biosphere cycling, but humans have a lot of control. And we have a oversized influence on the planet. If you make a closed system, then you understand you have to redesign the technosphere and put it in its proper place to enhance life, to make life easier, to recirculate things that humans need recirculating, but to do it in a way that doesn't pollute and damage the life inside. So just like it's our engineers who had to learn ecology and our ecologists had to learn engineering, they had to look at every process and every material to see if Biosphere 2, and we need this thinking on Earth, if our global biosphere can really successfully integrate, metabolize, and not be damaged by the technosphere.
I mean, I think that's really, really fascinating. And I mean, I talk a lot about technology in my work. And, you know, I often say, you know, the problem is, well, I love the Cedric Price quote. I don't know whether you know the English architect Cedric Price, who once said, technology is the answer, but what was the question? Which I just think is utterly brilliant. You know, so I think, you know, we have incredible technology, phenomenal technology, but as you rightly say, you know, we often forget to ask the question of what exactly are we trying to do with this, you know? And I think, again, talking about our inherited assumptions, you know, I think really from, you know, the Enlightenment onwards in many ways, you know, post-Descartes, if you like, you know, the all-seeing eye that kind of sees nature as a sort of Cartesian grid stretching away to infinity and infinitely manipulable. You know, we have got this sort of fatal separation, you know, the idea that we're somehow outside nature controlling it, whereas of course we're absolutely fundamentally part of it. And I was very moved, you know, when I was reading various accounts of Biosphere 2 and you and your colleagues were talking about how, you know, you almost sort of develop this kind of idea of the plants, your relationship with the plants as something extremely close and emotional, and you know, really, really wanted to look after them properly, you know, because you realise that if they stop breathing in CO2, you were going to be screwed, basically, you know. But that's fascinating to have actually experienced viscerally in that way. Mm.
Yeah, I mean, at the human level, in fact, we had built a very small test module to figure out how to seal things, to do, you know, subsystems, and it was packed with life. And it wasn't being used, and we decided to offer the opportunity to all of our staff to spend 24 hours in there. Now, I'm a New York City kid, so I totally relate to you, perhaps as a Londoner, certainly as a current Londoner. When I came out to New Mexico and, you know, met the people that later we formed the Institute of Ecotechnics, I knew how to do nothing. I came out of the university, and you know, those questions that were supposed to be revolving around are not the center of my life, because I think I have a deep respect both for being broadly educated, but the disconnect between universities and practical life is almost complete.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is coming. I mean, I absolutely have had the same experience, and I think our lives have had a similar trajectory in that, you know, you started off, I think, just studying philosophy, am I right? You know, right. And I started off with architecture, you know, and we both kind of ended up with plants, you know,
really.
And I think that's really fascinating, and in a way that sort of starts to impinge on the reason why we're having this conversation, which is, you know, this attempt to sort of set up a new kind of university that in a way is more fit for purpose and actually does address the questions that we actually face as humans, which I'm extremely attracted to. I mean, not least actually because my experience of academia is that it's absolutely a place where you're forbidden from asking the big ideas. You know, I mean, I have quite a big habit of getting ejected from academic institutions for sort of insisting on kind of talking about what seemed to me to be, you know, sort of drilling down to get to something that feels like the truth. And that ruffles a lot of feathers. So, you know, I've actually found that the only way I'm able to operate is actually outside traditional academia, interestingly, giving people the opportunity not only to sort of study in a very open-ended way, because I think, you know, a lot of us, you know, we have the sort of the asking of questions beaten out of us in early life, you know, and I often think, you know, the reason why I'm still here, as it were, doing what I'm doing now is that somehow people weren't able to beat that out of me, you know, and I've never really had a sort of a strong sense of understanding things properly. You know, I always feel so much I don't know, and so I have to keep asking questions. And, you know, if you can manage to do that into your 60s, you know, it turns out that actually you remain alive, you know, in a way that maybe a sort of traditional career path would not allow you to remain alive. it's inherently transdisciplinary, I would say. Because when you really start asking questions and you carry on asking questions, it turns out that the really important questions are all linked to all the other very important questions. And it just starts to appear as a kind of vast, connected, complex totality.
I mean, there are emerging disciplines. There's a new field called Ecological Engineering, which is kind of dear to my heart. I did my PhD with H.T. Odum, one of the famous Odum brothers who invented systems ecology. But it brings together the engineering mindset, but with this humble idea that anytime you have technology, you have problems. So let's see how we can enable natural mechanisms that have been perfected over the millennia, to do the work. So I went back to the university to get a master's and PhD because I wanted to bring these constructed wetlands for sewage treatment around the world. And I very naively, my first stop was the University of Arizona, and I said, well, why don't we just disconnect the School of Renewable Resources from the sewage system, and we'll make a beautiful constructed wetland. And I remember my advisor looking at me and saying, that's not how it operates at the university. So you wind up doing a theoretical study. But actually with Odum, I went down and built the first couple of wastewater gardens in Mexico because it was kind of my karma. We had collected the coral reef that was inside Biosphere 2, and they had no sewage treatment, and they're polluting, the places where they're scuba diving and snorkeling. And then when I came back, HT said, well, let's use that and we'll study those for your PhD. And I said, could we get away with that? But he was a master of academia, and his watchword was, it's silly that we have to give you these degrees. I know how the game is done. Follow my lead and we'll get you out of here and back into real life as soon as possible. And all my professors were amazed that I started a business and started building these things around the world because they're used to people studying something. Yeah. And people, their career is about something else anyway.
Yeah. No, I think there is again, I think you have to sort of stretch back into the past to kind of understand how we got here, but I think we've come through a sort of period when, I remember studying, sort of how disciplines like planning and architecture, which is my home kind of discipline, actually evolved. 500 years ago, all the people kind of chucking up amazing cathedrals in Florence and so on, they were kind of uomini universali, they were sort of men, mostly men, it has to be said, but of many talents and many disciplines. And building a building was no different to doing some maths, to philosophy, to whatever. And I can see why we've been through this kind of weird period. It's almost like kind of going through a pasta machine, and this kind of continuous pasta sheet turns into individual strands of spaghetti. But I think, what we're really experiencing now globally actually is a sort of recognition that we need joined up thinking again, and not just joined up thinking actually, but, precisely to the point you just made, actually working with our hands as well, because, we evolved as intelligent creatures through the manipulation of tools and sort of making stuff, and I think the idea that, progress is all about, so that we can sort of, I don't really know, what we're supposed to do once we've, as it were, externalized all the kind of day-to-day stuff that it takes to sustain life. Maybe we're meant to kind of float around like blobs and, watch Netflix. I'm not sure. But, to me, the sort of, among the many crises we face is this crisis of, as I say, kind of, thinking in a multidisciplinary way, which is why, I'm so attracted to food as a lens, because everything is in food, but also just doing stuff, actually doing real physical stuff, as you say, which of course, food for many people is almost the only sphere in their lives where it's still available to them. Everyone can grow food, everyone can cook, and so it just seems to me like a a brilliant gateway discipline almost to kind of, you know, to take on board again what it means to be a fully fledged human, which means, you know, to work with our whole body and not just our heads.
Yeah, and for urban people, I love your urban paradox, you know.
Yeah.
City people thinking because they don't see the food production. I remember when I grew up, there was, everybody for some reason had rose bushes and green lawns. And there was one cranky Italian grandfather at the end of the block who was growing squash and corn and beets and all of these things.
Yeah, yeah.
And, you know, it was almost kind of a little bit embarrassing for, you know, his son. And now I'm thinking he was the smartest guy on the block.
Oh, where
he wasn't having to buy fertilizers for his green grass and all that stuff. He was actually producing fresh food. So
absolutely.
You know, since we're becoming so urbanized, and your point about, are we going to live on the internet? You know, what I loved about the gang, the tribe that I joined, and, you know, we started projects not because they were easy, but because they were challenging. And to learn about the world, you know, you really need to have the perspective of different biomes. So by the way, when I mentioned technology, I know you appreciate this. We have created 2 anthropogenic biomes. One is the congregation of people in villages, towns, cities, and ranching and farming, that's a technological thing. And when I was researching for the book I wrote a couple of years ago, Pushing Our Limits, I was shocked, and it's probably only increased, that something like 45% of the land mass of the earth is devoted to agriculture and ranching, and some 38 or 40% to beef, which only provides a couple of percent of the human diet. So things have got to change. Things will change. You know, there's no future in this.
Yeah, I really agree, and I'm glad you like my idea of the urban paradox, because you're absolutely right. I grew up in central London. I don't think I saw a cow till I was about 8 years old. You know, that was a bit of a shock. I actually fell immediately in love with cows, I have to say, because they are wonderful animals. But a lot of my family, I'm half Finnish. They were all farmers, so I had a bit of a kind of deep immersion from absolutely a standing start in the whole world of farming. And no, I mean, I think it's again, as I say, I think it's this mindset that we've got into, or we've inherited rather, from a different time, which is like, you know, everything about life has got to be the ultimate life hack, you know. So it's basically, how can we kind of, you know, make everything, solve the problem of life, you know, with technology or machines or whatever it is, so that we're somehow emancipated to, as I say, float around as kind of superhumans or something. But actually it turns out that all the stuff that really gives us pleasure is all deeply embedded in reality, shall I say. You know, so I mean, this is very pathetic to even mention this, but I live in central London, but there's a tiny roof on the way up to my flat here, and I grow food on it, basically. And in fact, between now and tomorrow, I'm going to have to find time to pickle, a bit like you. I have vegetables calling to me. You know, I have to pickle my final crop of Danish pickling cucumbers, because otherwise they'll go off. So I don't know when I'm going to find time to do that. But I, you know, I've only grown food for about 5 years, and I have to say it's utterly changed, exactly as you were talking about in various accounts I've read that you've written about biosphere, of my relationship with plants. I'm almost moved to tears by plants. I just find them miraculous and wonderful, and of course they are the source of all life on Earth, and they have this miraculous ability to, you know, create sugar out of sunlight and all the rest of it. But, you know, my plant this year, it nearly got killed by a hailstorm. You didn't have that in the biosphere, you know, but, and it got really bent over. It lost half its stem, and I was really worried it wasn't going to survive. But not only did it survive, it's turned into the strongest, most productive cucumber plant I've ever grown. And I'm very, very moved by this, you know, and I kind of talk to it and I kind of go, how on earth did you do that? You know, there's something in nature that is so extraordinary and wondrous and self-regenerating. And if we can only get into the mindset of knowing that we are part of that too, and that we have that in us too, and let the plants teach us almost, that's the kind of where I'm at. But you need to actually encounter it yourself in order to feel this, I'm just so grateful, I had the chance to grow something, but most people, as you rightly say, they never go near any of this. So it doesn't sort of reach them in the same way. And, that's why I'm very passionate about bringing food growing back into cities. It's actually about allowing city dwellers to sort of get the bug, to fall in love with plants almost. And then, they'll never look at food in the same way again. And if they don't do that, they'll never look at the world in the same way again, because it's all connected.
I think that was what we actually thought Biosphere 2 was going to be a quiet research facility. And then, we had built a model, as one does when you're starting a project. And I think it was one European, geography magazine that put that against the backdrop of the beautiful mountains we were. And then people started, basically making pilgrimages. Yeah. And then we realized that somehow Biosphere 2 touched the nerve. And it's almost strange to say, because this is only 30 years ago, that even the word biosphere had to be spelled for people.
Yeah.
They had no idea. So Biosphere 2 was not a model of planet Earth. You can't do that. We didn't have an upper stratosphere and deep we only had, 7 biomes, including the farm and our little micro city. But people could actually get their minds around it. And, I've seen lots of images of people going around the Kaaba in Mecca. People would go around Biosphere 2. And what I loved about it was they saw this beautiful agriculture with 24 different rotating crops, and us in there, like Asian peasants, planting our rice seedlings. And food, turned out to be an incredible resource and center of the biospherian's life. Not only growing it, we learned to be such better farmers because it dawned on us we're in this $150 million technological architectural beauty, and we're sustainable. We are sustainable farmers. We're subsistence farmers. If we don't grow it, we don't eat it. And the satisfaction of coming to a beautiful meal. Everyone was very motivated because we were hungry. We were very, very hungry. To actually look at all the elements in that meal and remember how we planted it, how we weeded it, how we tended it, how we harvested it, how we amazing.
I think that's really extraordinary. And I mean, it's funny because I'm doing a lot of reading at the moment about hunter-gatherers, and I'm really fascinated by where we came from as a species, and I think the sharing of food is something that's still really hardwired in us. And I mean, obviously hunter-gatherers haven't grown the food and looked after it and tended it in the same way as you have, but they're definitely hungry and they've definitely worked hard to get the food, so there's sort of that sense of really valuing that moment is the same. And, I think right there with what you described as my idea of the heart of a good life, actually, it's really what I'm arguing for. It's arguing for, being not only connected to the sort of the ecological systems, of which we are inevitably a part. And I find it really fascinating when, you read about, all the recent discoveries being made now about the human microbiome and how analogous they are to the rhizosphere. And, all of these things that were too small for us to see. We spent so long staring up at the stars, we forgot to stare beneath our feet, as it were. So not only that understanding, but also the understanding that real satisfaction and joy and a sense of just belonging in a place and, feeling good about the world is about taking care of your own stuff, and kind of taking care of the, shall we say, non-human life without which there is no life, and then just sharing and celebrating it. I just cannot think of a better image of, a good life than what you've just described. I think it's incredible.
It's really interesting, and I love this idea of the new school of the Anthropocene, or Anthropocene, if you prefer, because it's kind of like we're at the edge of cliffs.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to be alarmist, but clearly, you know, the loss of biodiversity, the conversion of natural biomes to these anthropogenic ones, at some point, critical life support facilities for us and all life are threatened.
Yeah.
And so the idea of the Anthropocene is to recognize we are not the masters of the earth, but we are a major disturbing influence, and we need to be intelligent. So the other thing, you know, from Vernadsky, he saw the next evolutionary step, and it's a word that almost every educated Eastern European and Russian will know, the noosphere, the sphere of intelligence, because if you have that kind of a power, one species, to affect, you know, the cycling of elements in a very profound way, you need to use your intelligence. And, you know, he thought that scientific knowledge would be part of the answer, but I think, you know, you're on the same page I am. It needs to be embodied. We are not like, you know, the blobs that you're talking about. And watching Netflix, which I do a lot. I love movies. That's part of a life. You know, but it, you know, there are so many tendrils. So I guess what I was saying is, it's so ironic that we've invented now this word Anthropocene, and we're starting, you know, there's like a whole generation to which the biosphere is not only a concept, but they are aware that we have to change radically the way we do business.
Yeah.
Everything we do impacts the biosphere. And the final point, which you're also on, is that crazy separation that we think that we're separate from the environment. I don't like that word because it's too dualistic. When I give talks, I said, you know, take a couple of breaths of air and then try to visualize that world of, you know, floating green things in the ocean and the plants, you know, that are producing the oxygen that is keeping you alive.
Yeah. I mean, that's also a fascinating chapter in your experience in the biosphere when the oxygen levels started dropping, and you basically felt like you were sort of 2/3 up a high mountain the whole time, and, you know, just becoming aware of, exactly as you say, the act of breathing. And, you know, also the act of eating is literally to ingest the world in which we live and of which we are part. And, you know, I think that's so fascinating. I mean, I think what I'm trying to drive at, and it's a kind of sense that even though, you know, we live on a limited world, it's a dynamic world, and it's big enough and it's glorious enough that we can sort of feel, you know, we don't have to feel claustrophobic about this, but also to sort of take pleasure out of things that are sort of, you know, every day. I mean, I'm very fascinated by the word mundane, because, and indeed, you know, I was studying that before I got into my food thing, because, you know, mundane is a word that we use to mean kind of boring. Oh, I'm just doing the mundane stuff like cooking dinner or whatever, you know. But actually, if you look at the root of mundus, mundane, it's mundus. It means worldly, of the, you know, cosmic. And so I think, you know, there's a sort of, again, I seem to have a very historical perspective on all of this, but I think we have inherited a kind of, from historical times, you know, this idea, as you say, that we're separate from the world, that we can control the world, but also that a good life is somehow elsewhere. You know, it's not in the here and now. It's kind of, oh, let's dash off and have a holiday, or let's, you know, kind of get a bigger car and blah. And actually, I mean, and it sounds very Buddhist, and actually I think Epicurus I've adopted him as our Western Buddhist philosopher, because actually, you know, what Epicurus says is that the stuff you have to do every day, you know, you have to eat, you have to defecate, you have to breathe, whatever. Take care of those things and take pleasure in those things, because your body is actually wired up to give you pleasure in doing those things, you know. So you're working with your body now, and you're working with the environment. And if you do that, it's like a kind of philosopher's stone of a good life. You know, everything else follows because you're taking care of stuff. And I just find this a really wonderful kind of counter blast, if you like, to the sort of the idea, as I said, of the life hack. I'm sure you've heard of this Food Soylent, where Rob Reinhardt's kind of, nutritional porridge that you just slug down so you're emancipated from having to eat. I don't want that kind of emancipation. I don't know what I'd do with myself all day if I didn't have my cucumbers to look after, to sort of to give me a sense of time and meaning. Actually you about to harvest your apples and your pears, that's tying you to cosmic rhythms, because the plants know it's time, winter's coming, and it's time to sort of shed the fruit, and we as humans and the partners of the trees know it's time to, store the fruit or pickle it or eat it or do whatever we're going to do with it. So I love that sense of being, at home in the world, not only in a place, but also in time, and I think these are all the things that, shall we say, the industrial capitalist project tend to sort of separate us from, that are actually essential to a good life and to well-being and a sense of place and belonging. And we need to get them all back. I mean, that to me is why food is such a powerful lens for sort of saying, where are we going to go from here?
Yeah, I mean, the highlight of our farming is not delivering boxes of produce to the back of CSAs or restaurants or co-ops. It's going to farmers markets.
Yeah.
And, a little bit of our pride, farmers markets are really booming, I'm sure in Europe as well, but it's kind of a new thing in the United States. And, Santa Fe is rightly really proud, right in the heart of the rail yard district, which is kind of the center of Santa Fe. They have they have several markets. And we revolutionized it when we started selling there about 20 years ago, because we offered people tastes of our fruits. We weren't producing vegetables at that point. And it was amazing. Of course, we're good salespeople. So we had orgasmic peaches that got broadened to orgasmic fruit. And our neighbors sitting there waiting for their regulars would watch us sell out everything we had. Amazing. And now everybody does that. Of course, now with COVID, that's too much of a risk.
Yeah.
But to me, that was the really great pleasure, was to see people, and it's equally true if you cook up some collard greens or beets or give them a taste of cucumbers or fresh carrots.
Yeah.
To see the enjoyment.
Yeah.
When people eat real food. And we're certified organic, but I think the big thing is local food that farmers who love their crops and don't hit the sprays, so you're not ingesting a world of unknown risk factors.
Absolutely.
That's what it's all about.
Absolutely. I mean, it's very interesting to me that, now that I'm growing my own food, there is no way on earth I would spray it with chemicals of any kind. Right. It's certainly not pesticides. I want to eat that stuff, So again, this sense that sort of, why would you, send toxins into this world, which is our world, and they're going to come back. I mean, I love the story. Well, I didn't love it, but I mean, I was fascinated by the story of the pot of glue that you had in the biosphere, that, that kind of was just, the lid wasn't on properly, and one tiny pot of glue was poisoning your entire biosphere. I mean, I just found that really fascinating. And I mean, as I say, I think it's kind of, it's accepting, our place in the world is also accepting that we have to take care of our own, sort of externalities, to put it politely, but anything that it takes to sustain our lives and non-human life or other than human life is our responsibility. And the paradigm that we have to sort of question and indeed change is the one that, the consumerist idea that, you get new stuff, and you get rid of old stuff, and you don't really think about, sort of how that loop gets closed in the end. And I mean, I guess what I find positive exactly is stories like you. We haven't lost our sense of, wonder at these things or enjoyment. Our bodies are still hunter-gatherer bodies. We're still, if you give us something good and delicious to eat that's got full of nutrients, we can taste it. So it's not all lost. But for me, the real challenge we face is in kind of coming up with an idea of a good life that is as attractive to people that they want to lead as the current idea of a good life, which is over. It's predicated on a set of conditions that no longer exist, such as nature is expendable and, infinite, for example, would be the main one. And I think we can do it through experiences like the one you've just described. It's through pleasure and joy and engagement that we're going to get there.
Yeah. Fantastic. So yeah, sorry for interrupting you on that thought, Mark. I don't know if you want to jump back on what Caroline said a few minutes ago, or kind of close up with something new.
If you can remember what it was. Was I talking about, I think we just need a new image, a new idea of a good life, basically. And I just, for me, food is just, without wishing to kind of use the sort of overly cheesy food analogy, but it's the low-hanging fruit because everybody has to eat every day. But we don't value food. We've created this illusion of a thing called cheap food, which of course doesn't really exist, can't exist. And the cheap, the less you pay for food, the more there's some hideous externality kind of behind the theatre curtain that you can't see. So my kind of, one size fits all thing that we could do in order to really get our value systems the right way up again is to revalue food, put the true cost of food back in food, which of course then sort of has a series of potentially revolutionary effects, because if you believe, as I do, that a good society is one in which everybody eats well, because if you eat well, you're living well, then if people couldn't afford this food that, we're now saying should cost the same, if you like, as the only food in which all of the costs are currently internalized, which is, organic, kind of artisanally, locally, seasonally produced, if you like, regeneratively produced, then we need to look at our tax structures, and we need to look at society, and we need to look at, wealth redistribution and indeed land reform. And these things come naturally out of that idea. And I think we just have to kind of, have the courage to address them, because you can't flourish without land, and you can't flourish without food. And again, the idea that we live on a limited planet is also, automatically leads to questions of, okay, how do we share this? How do we share what we have?
Yeah, I mean, I love win-win-win kind of solutions, if you will. Yeah. And isn't it beautiful that they've calculated 1 inch of rich organic topsoil on all our farms and ranches would make a huge dent in global climate change.
Yeah.
So, yeah, times of crisis are times of opportunity.
Absolutely.
So, one of my favorite quotes is, "Things that can't go on don't." And I think that kind of summarizes the way we have been doing business since the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
And, to me, I know there are people who think of the Anthropocene and get really depressed. But to me, it's like a kid getting new toys. We had new toys and they just spellbound us. And I love that in the 19th century, belching smokestacks were a sign of civic pride. Now we realize the deadly effects of it. Yeah. And I've read in your work, and anyone who looks around at the human condition, there is this, in the midst of unimaginable supposed material wealth, there is this emptiness, there is this hollowness. And some of the worst phrases ever invented are nature deprivation. And I think it was a Australian eco-psychologist who has the word solastalgia, which is the sadness of seeing places that you love degrade.
Yes. Yeah.
It's true in the countryside. But the opportunity is, because the system can't go on, that we will rethink it. We will rethink it in a really radical way from food. And I love that you're the champion of real food.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I think, I completely agree with you. And I mean, I often say most of the stuff that I read for my work that is most on the money and most, to use an awful term as well, but, most kind of on the point and inspirational was written in the 1970s. I mean, everything from kind of E.F. Schumacher's utterly unsurpassed book, Small is Beautiful, for example, but everything that went in, Limits to Growth, the hippie movement, Herman Daly, all of these, we've known this stuff for a long time. And I agree with you. It's only now. And I know there's a lot of kind of frustrated hippies going around going, we've been saying this for 50 years, but I think it's only now that people are really waking up to the fact that we really, really need to act. And I agree with you. I mean, I think we have all the ideas. And as you say, it's about the soil, it's about complexity, and it's about actually, getting, as you rightly say, getting pleasure from the idea that we have this beautiful planet, and learning how to live on it should be it's like having your doll's house and saying, okay, how am I going to kit this thing out? I mean, it's if we can learn to get our pleasure from that, if we can learn to get our pleasure from just the beauty of the world. I mean, I think COVID's actually taught a lot of people this, because under lockdown, I mean, in the UK, we were talking about garden apartheid. So basically, people with gardens were actually totally fine with lockdown because, they could just hang out in nature, and indeed they did. The people who suffered, obviously, apart from key workers who had to work in dangerous conditions, were people who were cooped up in tiny flats in the city and had no access to outside space. And they really, really suffered. And I think, what I love about food, just to say one more food-related thing, is that it sits at the nexus of our two most important sets of relationships. One is with our fellow humans on the one hand, and the other is with, the thing that we call nature, but of course we're part of both of those things. And that's why food is so powerful as a sort of medium for sort of saying, well, if we value this, everything else follows. We value the people with whom we share food, and they're human and non-human. Every earthling has to eat, including the microbes, as you say, or we're not going to get there. So, if you learn to love your microbes and learn to love, your plants and everything, all the human and non-humans on the planet, it's a wonderful place to be, actually.
Yeah, totally. We are. When I was saying we're lucky, but we're not passengers on planet Earth, and I forget who coined it, but it's something like everyone on planet Earth is crew.
Yeah.
We're part of it, and what a joy to live in a beautiful biosphere. And aside from the alarmist thing that we're pushing the planet, is what kind of a world, what kind of green cities do we want to live in? So food is a magic thread that connects everything. Of course, everything connects everything.
Exactly.
And I was giving a talk. It was like in Dallas, Texas, to community college kids, and you're winding up, and I don't know, it's kind of cheesy in a way, but it was heartfelt. It suddenly came to me. They tell us that we have a soulmate. We're always looking for the soulmate, and maybe that's BS, et cetera, et cetera. But here's an idea. Your soulmate is Earth's biosphere.
Yeah, I love that.
And you are part of it, and fall in love with your biosphere, your portion of it, your space. If you're trapped in an apartment, fall in love with the trees you can see outside, hopefully, etc.
Yeah. Or just a basil plant on your windowsill, fall in love with that. I really agree with you. I mean, I think that's such a beautiful idea. And, I would like us to end our wonderful conversation, for me at least, on that, because you've actually made me feel a bit teary. But I think it's absolutely what we have to do. And it's what, as I said earlier, one naturally does do if one just sort of gets engaged and works with plants and learns about them. You fall in love with them, but they are utterly miraculous, life-giving beings without which we wouldn't be here. So there's just nothing not to love.
And fall in love with yourself and the human species. Yes, we can be incredibly low and destructive, but look at the heights that we can that we can attain. So if you love pandas and boab trees and blue whales and whatever, and they are children of the biosphere, so are we humans.
Absolutely.
It's just taken a few knocks for us to start waking up to our reality.
Yes, and also, you know, as I say, this idea that we are, you know, if you look at our biome, our microbiome, and you look at the sort of the rhizosphere of the plant, we are the same. You know, we are made of the atoms, made up of the meals that we've eaten in our lifetime. Where do those meals come from? The natural world. We're literally constructions of nature. So, yeah, I agree. I mean, to fall in love with that part of ourselves, which is the best part of ourselves, and then to get engaged, to get going, to actually work with it, think about it, care about it, and act on it. That to me is the essence of the good life, for sure.